This is a Rogue Media Network podcast.
Housing alone will never solve homelessness, but community will. This is John Calloway, the Executive Director of Mission Waco. Welcome to It Takes a Village with Creekside Community Village, where we will discuss Mission Waco's newest project, Creekside Community Village, the most talked about neighborhood in Waco. This transformational development combines permanent, supportive housing with life-giving community engagement. I hope you'll join us along this journey as we hear from stakeholders involved in helping make this dream a reality.
Well, welcome everyone to It Takes a Village with Creekside Community Village. I'm your host today, Carlos Hinojosa. I am the Associate Executive Director of Advancement for Mission Waco. And here with me is Jonathan Wilson-Hargrove, my friend and our special guest tonight at our banquet for Mission Waco.
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks.
Great. Jonathan is a spiritual writer, preacher, community cultivator. He serves currently as the Assistant Director for Partnerships and Fellowships at Yale University Center for Public Theology and Public Policy. He's a graduate of Eastern University and Duke Divinity School. In 2003, Jonathan and his wife, Leah, founded the Rutba House, a house of hospitality where formerly homeless individuals are welcomed into a community that eats, prays, and shares life together. Jonathan also founded the School for Conversion, an education center that works to make surprising friendships possible in Durham, North Carolina. He's an associate minister at the historically Black St. John's Missionary Baptist Church. He's authored or co-authored many books in his career. Jonathan, I'm so glad to have you on the podcast today. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to talk to you and all of Mission Waco's family here.
Well, thank you so much.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah. We're so excited that you're here, that you've taken some time out of your schedule to come and talk at our banquet tonight and to be here on this podcast. We're hoping you can share some of your insights, and we just really like to hear from you. So would you tell us a little bit about yourself, about where you grew up, your faith journey, and your education and things like that?
Yeah, I grew up in North Carolina, out in tobacco country. In the 80s and 90s. I tell people my only real claim to fame is that my mama's people are all from Mount Airy, which is where Andy Griffith grew up. And when he went to Hollywood, he called it Mayberry. But other than changing the name of the town, he didn't change a lot of the details. So my Uncle Otis is the town drunk in the Andy Griffith show, if you've ever seen it on Nickelodeon reruns. That kind of small town America that show and all the nostalgia around it kind of harkens back to. I really did grow up in that. we were people who knew each other, and I was loved really well by a family and a community, a church where people who prayed together on Sunday, prime tobacco together during the week, and that kind of stuff. And growing up there, I was captivated by the story that the Bible tells, and I wanted to be part of, this great big thing God has been doing in the world since the world began. And I thought, partly because of the moment I grew up in, I've come to learn, and I think partly because of my own just kind of inclinations, I thought that I wanted to be president of the United States for Jesus. That was kind of my goal growing up. Again, I was real supported by everybody, so got, encouraged to do all that I could. And I ended up going to the U.S. Senate as a page when I was a teenager. And I think in that moment realized that there was more of a tension than I had realized between, the powers and principalities of this world and the way it works and what Jesus is up to. So I got interrupted, but it was, for me, it was a real invitation to come back to the story, come back to Jesus, and meet other people who helped me to learn to follow Jesus in new ways. So that's kind of been my journey since then. And, I'm grateful for my family, grateful for the Baptist church that raised me, but also glad to have connected with, the Catholic monastic tradition that Benedictines have been a huge gift to me. Happy to be, um, uh, deeply rooted in the liberation story of the Black church in America, and have learned a lot from it. And glad to have kind of friends and fellow travelers all across the varied story of the people who follow Jesus. But am more convinced than ever that Jesus really does offer us a profound way to connect with how the universe was made and how it's supposed to work.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that. That's I've had the opportunity to sit and talk with you before, but those are some things that I hadn't heard before myself. So thank you for sharing that. Tell us a little bit about your family.
So you mentioned that we live at the Rutba House. Leah and I started that with a couple friends almost 25 years ago now, in Durham, in the Walltown community. And that community, the Walltown community, though it was new to me when we moved there, has really shaped my whole adult life. It was founded by a man named George Wall, so Durham has some similarities to Waco in that, there's a big university in town, and there are neighborhoods around the university that have been connected but are not always, a part of the conversation at the university. So Walltown was founded by Mr. Wall, who did service work on the campus of the community when Durham was very much a Jim Crow town. So the college moved to town in the late 1800s. And so this man, who had been himself enslaved, continued to work for the family that had enslaved him. And one of the sons of that family was teaching at this Trinity College when it came to town. So he built a home and did, the service work for this new school in town. But a community grew up around him of people who really made the growing university work. The people who ran everything, and that was a Black community because of segregation. And so, fast forward 100 years, when we moved to town, this was a place where the civil rights movement had been anchored in some of the churches there, and people who had been part of that as young people were still, very much faith leaders in the community. And it was a community where a whole generation of people who could leave did, and the, war on drugs, so-called war on crime, had really broken up a lot of families and created economic challenges for the community. So we came at a time when the impacts of poverty were real, and there was also this rich tradition to learn from and draw on. And so we joined the local church and started a hospitality house that was very much in partnership with people who were there, but gave us a space to invite people in who were coming back home from prison, people who had ended up on the streets for various reasons, and to have a shared table together where we learned one another's stories and have tried to learn what it means to be family together. So it's a formative space. Our family has lived there with many other people. Some people who came because they needed a place to stay, and some people who came because even though they had a place to stay, they knew they needed community. So we sometimes talk about, being a community of people who were formerly housed and formerly unhoused, but who have found community with one another and really found and are finding how we need each other and how we can grow into who we were made to be by opening our lives to one another.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's really powerful. And I had the chance I've been to your house a couple times.
Yeah.
And I've always been amazed every time I've been at just who's there.
Mm.
It's just a great mix of people. Seems like every time I've been there. How many folks are living there right now?
So in our house, our family of 5 and 2 other people right now. One of whom we met right when we came to the neighborhood. She's been our neighbor for a quarter century and is sharing household with us right now. And another fellow we met over the years. So yeah, I mean it's a relatively small group of people living together, but trying to be a kind of hub for
Sure.
community life and for, what I refer to as the movement, which I think of as like, God's movement in the world, but also the various, networks of people who are working together
Right.
for good in our city and in our country. And a hospitality house is a place where all of that can intersect.
Yeah.
And it can be a little chaotic, but it gives us a chance to to stay open to what the Spirit's doing.
Right.
And I mean, it strikes me that what we've been trying to live into is very similar to what y'all are trying to do with the Creekside project.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, with that in mind, what are some things as we are trying to discover what it looks like to be a community, to live in community with one another, those those formerly housed, what are some things that you can, from your experience right now, tell Mission Waco, tell us, hey, here's what I've experienced.
Yeah.
Here's what you can look for. Here are the hard things to look for. Here are the amazing things that you're going to see come out of this.
Yeah.
Give us some insights of what you think we might be experiencing.
Yeah. One of the huge gifts to us early on was these Benedictines I mentioned earlier reached out. And I grew up Baptist, and I didn't know anything about the Catholic monastic tradition. I mean, I'd read about it. I didn't know people in that tradition. But these folks reached out, and they were real sweet. They said, we've heard that Christians are living in community together, which is exciting because that's what we do. They said, but we haven't had many young people in recent years. So, it's encouraging to see that y'all are doing this. And they said, in our experience, it hasn't always been easy. So, if you want to talk to anybody about it, we've been at it for 1,500 years, So they were just kind of gracious in that way. And I took them up on it and started visiting the St. John's Abbey in Minnesota, and they introduced me to the Rule of Benedict. And the Rule of Benedict is in many ways just, an attempt to say, if you want to live the gospel life with other people in an intimate communal setting, like here's some guidelines for how to do that. And I kind of boil it down to, Benedict has some real particular instructions based on his context and his experience, but what he says is essentially to give yourself to the gospel way, you need to eat together, meet together, and pray together. And he has some kind of structure for that. Although when you get to know Benedictines, they've been very flexible with that structure over the years. It changes. So, I mean, we've certainly been more flexible than even that tradition usually thinks of it. But I think that's the core of it. Like, people who come together and who are anchored in a story bigger than them, they need like space to remember that story. That's what liturgical prayer is. There's 1,000 different ways to do it, but just to come back again and again to remember, like, this is why we're here. This is who we are. This is what we're trying to grow into. This is our vision. and then the meeting piece is important, like, because there are all kinds of logistical challenges that'll come up, and um, figuring out a sustainable way for people to talk to each other about how are we going to work this out is just critical. I mean, I think we probably overdid meetings early on in our life together. We met all the time, and they would go on forever. And I think, you have to set limits on it. But I do think we just developed some habits. And I remember I have this distinct memory of this conflict that happened. It was an argument over dishes, but if you've lived closely with people, arguments over dishes can explode, into something where, I mean, people know this from marriage. They know this from.
It's not always about the dishes.
Yeah, it's just everything comes out, and I just remember this blow up between two people in the house, and there was yelling and it was in the evening and everybody was there and without anybody saying anything, we all just went into the living room where we were used to meeting and sat down in the circle where we were used to meeting, and we worked it out together in that space. And I think you just have to develop the habits, to be able to do that as a group, and to be able to take responsibility for that. Like this isn't a project that some of us are in charge of. This is our life, and we're all taking responsibility for it. So, so that meeting together piece, and I think the table is huge. Eating together. Eating is such a basic thing to our survival, but it also because it is for all of us. It's something we all share in common. It also just carries so much of who we are and what made us. For people who've come together from all kinds of backgrounds to have had the chance to, make the meals that the people who loved us made. It's just beautiful to share that with one another and the stories that come out of that. And often how, food has been tied to people's work. We had an undocumented neighbor who lived with us for years at the end of his life when he was no longer able to work because of disability, and the hospital called and said, normally this person would go on disability, but doesn't have papers, so he can't qualify for federal assistance and needs a place to go. So that's how he came to us. And he was a beautiful gift to us in many ways, but one was just at dinner. How my kids grew up with we called him, Uncle Tony, Tio Antonio. I mean, he was sort of an elder in that way, but he had worked in every field in America, and he knew where everything we ever ate came from. So he would just tell the story, I picked these apples in Washington. I picked these strawberries in California. He had been on citrus farms in Florida. He had done it all. The table becomes a space for people to share those kind of stories and just, a regular rhythm of being together.
Right.
So I think those things are real anchors to community life. They've kept the Benedictines going for, for
a long time,
centuries, and
right.
Have kept us grounded too.
Something you said about that situation that blew up and then everybody just kind of wandered into the living room. It makes me think of, it's literally a practice.
It's a practice,
right?
Yeah.
Like in school, we practice fire drills so that when the time comes, we know what to do. In sports, we practice so that whatever situation comes up, we know what to do.
Yeah.
And I think that's just a beautiful thing that happened, is like everyone knew, okay, we need to talk about this right now. It would probably go a long way in a lot of people's marriages to have those practices.
Yeah.
And it worked.
I think I would just add that I appreciate your focusing on practice, because like practices are about how we live.
Right.
And I think one of the other things that we had to learn as we were learning how to do this together, and this probably will come up with y'all's project too, is that like so many people in our society are programmatized, and I'm talking about from both directions. So like people who've been unhoused have been in every kind of program there is for this, and are used to knowing that they're not in charge. So if you're not in charge, like you learn to like navigate the rules, not take responsibility. And that happens on the other side too. Like people who've been to college and been, they've been programmatized to like residential life. There's some, person who's in charge. It's not like, it's not me, I'm not in charge. And like for everybody, we've had like, well, no, actually we have to have some practices where like we are in charge. There's not
Right.
anybody else to do this. This is our life. And yeah, I think that's been a growing process for everyone in our community to deprogram and learn the practices that people like that we really want to embrace to, live the life that we're made for. I think it's an important part of growing up for all of us. But there's a lot of growing up that doesn't happen until you kind of, hit that thing that makes you take responsibility. And so I think that's an important part of becoming community,
Right.
is learning to take responsibility for this life that we share.
Yeah, and it hits people at different times,
Mm-hmm.
and there are people that are quite advanced in years before they realize that. And there are people that have to take that responsibility much earlier on than you might expect. And in that sense, it really literally takes a village. I mean, it takes a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
You've described this new monasticism. I'd like you to talk a little bit more about that and explain to us, to our listeners that may not be familiar with that concept, a little bit about what that is.
Yeah. Well, in short, it's a way of reading church history to say that like community movements and these efforts to kind of, intensively build community on a small scale, it's not new, right? That happened for the first time really in the 3rd and 4th century when Christianity kind of became a cultural phenomenon for the first time in the Roman Empire. Like the powers embraced the religion, which meant, what it meant to be part of the religion radically changed, because before that, like it was an intensive community because it separated you from a lot of the people around you. Now, if it helps to get a job downtown, if you're a Christian, Christianity is a different kind of thing. Just socially, it's a different kind of thing. And so people who were aware of how that changed the experience of the faith started going out to the desert in Syria and Egypt and other places and establishing these communities. Technical name for that is Cenobitic monasticism, but it's just people who were living together in an intentional way to try to practice the gospel life that Jesus had taught the disciples, and the people had been living in these little communities that were living the gospel way, kind of over and against the way of the empire before the empire went and said it was Christian. So that pattern has actually repeated itself many times in church history, and those movements are usually called monastic movements. So I mentioned Benedict earlier, and Benedict is one of the key figures in helping to establish the monastic movement that shaped most of Europe and the kind of Western culture that we've all inherited in American society. So what we've tried to do, along with many other people who've been involved in kind of communal experiments and building beloved community over the past couple decades, is we've tried to intentionally learn from those monastic movements, and so calling it a new monasticism is a way of saying, like, we don't think we're the first people to do this. There are patterns and histories that we can learn from, and that's part of what I was saying earlier about Benedict. But maybe one more just lesson from Benedict would apply well here in terms of what you were saying about how it takes a village. The villages that we're born into, the like local political culture that we know is shaped by a world that is dominated by what the Bible calls principalities and powers, ways of relating to people that are counter to God's ways. And I think it's fair to say that a lot of those ways in our world are shaped by greed. You know, we've seen in American culture, you know, the way that markets and technology can create, you know, possibilities that people had never imagined. And a lot of that's great. You know, we all carry these things in our pockets and have, you know, access to, I mean, I'm here because I got on a plane yesterday and, you know, could get here quickly. So there are a lot of these things that we enjoy, but I think it's always been true in the history of the world that like good things can take the place of God. And there's a way in which I think the human tendency toward greed and the fascination we have with the possibilities of, you know, of technology and markets to solve our problems has given us a form of an economy that just ends up putting people in radically different situations where some people have incredible resources and other people just struggle to survive. I mean, I think maybe the most glaring fact of our existence that we are distracted from in 1,000 ways every day is that in this country, 800 people die every day from poverty. This is the richest country in the history of the world. We've never had this many resources as human beings, and yet somehow we've structured our life such that poverty itself kills 800 people in this country every day. And like that's just a reality that we don't talk about very much, but it's the base reality that you're trying to address with a community, right, that says, look, some people are without housing. I mean, you can't live without housing. The UN says housing is a basic human right? Like to have access to shelter is just like part of what it means to be human. But we live in a way that we've gotten used to people. I mean, we walk past people on the street. We know that, hundreds of people in a relatively small town don't have anywhere to stay tonight.
Right.
And, you know, as people of faith who know that every human being is created in God's image, and that, I think this is the profound thing for us as Christians, that we can't know God without knowing Jesus in people who are marginalized. When I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. That's Jesus talking to us. So this is essential for us. It's essential to not just to recognizing someone else's humanity. It's essential to maintaining our own humanity. That's what's at stake, in something like this. So back to Benedict. One of the things I learned from the monastic tradition is Benedict says, in a world that's ordered by these kinds of hierarchies that are shaped by greed and, other forces that the Christian tradition calls sin, he says in that context, a community can order itself in a completely different way. And so he instructs communities to create a hierarchy. There is a hierarchy. There's always leadership and structure, but he says the only hierarchy in the communities that he established, and again, this is 5th century feudal society, is the order you came in. So in a world where people who were born to the aristocracy stayed in the aristocracy, people who were born as peasants were going to be peasants. Like the only social mobility was the military, and it was very limited. You could climb up just slightly, generation by generation in the military, but there was nothing else. Like it was fixed, and people believed that God had made it that way. In that context, Benedict says a community is going to gather around Jesus and Jesus's way of living, and the only order is going to be when you showed up, so that if the son of the mayor or Roman delegate, whoever for that area, shows up the day after the guy who was begging on the street, like that guy begging on the street will be his superior his whole life in that community. I mean, people who study the emergence of the idea of democracy say that it came out of the practice of this radical sort of political life in Benedictine communities in Europe, because these things spread all over, and there was this notion that like that kind of radical mobility was possible. I still think we're challenged to practice that, right? And I think like in building structures where people are invited to take responsibility for the community, a community like what y'all are imagining at Creekside has the opportunity to lean into that and to say, like people are going to be coming here with very different needs, with very different backgrounds, but we can work on being a community where who you were before you got here doesn't forever determine what your role in this community is going to be, right? Like there is a need for wisdom and for leadership, but Benedict says always lean into who's been around, like who's put in the time, who has patiently worked with this community, because no matter what degrees they had, no matter what experience they had before they came here, that's going to be a measure of their capacity to lead in this community.
Right. No, as we're talking, I'm thinking about some of the ideas that working in a place like Mission Waco brings up, like the book When Helping Hurts, right? And so this idea of, I'm the only one that can help you up kind of thing. And what I hear you saying is that some of that idea is not going to be kind of in play if you're living community the right way. And so then another question comes into my mind of like, how do you build the trust that's necessary for someone to accept the help? And then how do you allow yourself, if you are one of our missional families, how do you make it so that you can be trustworthy to somebody who may not have, because people are going to come in and assume these hierarchies like you were just describing. Yeah. What advice would you give us or people that are coming into Creekside? What advice would you give us to help us build that trust and build that community quickly, or not quickly, but from the beginning of what kind of attitudes? I don't know if I'm even making sense here, but what kinds of things would you recommend to us?
It's the key question. I mean, you're right on it. Trust takes time. So I don't think there's a way to fast track it. But it does happen over time if people are willing to be vulnerable. And I think the practices that Benedict encouraged and that we've tried to learn, they have to invite us into genuinely relying on one another, right? And in community, that often means paying attention to who a person is, what their gifts are, and then as a group, empowering that person to lead in that gift, right? Trusting them to prepare the meal, trusting them to welcome the guests, trusting them to, do the shopping, trusting them to keep the books, like whatever has to happen. And people are different. So, I mean, nobody's good at everything. So you do have to pay attention to people, but really entrusting and empowering people to lead in their gifts. And then I think this is the other thing that Benedict's great with is Benedict has this notion that communities need leadership and people need to lead, and leadership doesn't like make you a different kind of person in the community. So like in the rule of Benedict, if you serve as abbot after your term is done, you can go back to being a dishwasher. Like it's not like you've become a different status in the community, right?
Right.
It's a way you serve the community if you have administrative gifts and that kind of thing.
Right.
So I think those things would be important for any community. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just one of the challenges that I think we will face at Creekside is building that community. And I'm excited to see what can come out of that. And I really am excited to see we know from our friends down at Community First in Austin, their mantra is housing alone is not going to solve homelessness, but community will. And I really am excited to see what kind of community we can build out at Creekside. Because I think the model is somewhat geared towards having the missional families being the teachers, but I think that I think the opposite is going to happen. I think that the teachers are going to be taught a lot by the people that are living there.
Yeah.
The people that have experienced some real trauma that has led to their lives changing dramatically and not being exactly what they expected. And I think, I hope that is a lot of what we see.
Yeah.
I hope we see a lot of people teaching people.
Yeah.
So,
and in my experience, learning and growing together and taking seriously the role that trauma you named plays in people's lives has meant that I can't keep faith with the people I've known for my whole adult life now without acknowledging that like these powers that I mentioned earlier are at work, that like every trauma is experienced in the body, but it's not just personal. These things happen because of, disparities in education, disparities in just economic reality. They happen because of racism that's real and that, means that some people just live in radically different situations than other people. And it makes them vulnerable to things. And so, I think a part of a community taking responsibility for one another is also like, your missional families, which I guess, in some ways, my family's been a missional family in our context. We were certainly there because we sensed that like God called us to be there, and that that we were joining God's mission, right, by being part of this. But I think we've had to learn to follow the leadership of poor people who've organized and who've said, we want to change the way things work so that people we know and our kids can have a different reality. So I'm very involved with something called the Poor People's Campaign, which has grown out of communities of poor people saying, like, we really know that the world doesn't have to be this way. That like there are policy changes that could make life different, and that's a conversation that we also have to take responsibility for, right? That we have to be engaged in that way. So yeah, I think about that as an important part of my own experience of sort of trying to grow into God's mission in our context. The other piece I wanted to say is that so in terms of the real relationships that people bring, whether they're coming from being housed or from being unhoused, and the kind of social worlds that people are part of, that you continue to be part of, right? Because you're part of families, you have friendship networks, all of this. What it inevitably means in this kind of community is that the formerly unhoused people, as long as we have this, radically segregated society that we're living in, will always know more people who are unhoused, more people who have been traumatized by poverty, people who are dying from that reality, and folks who have been housed will always be in relationship with people for whom the society is more or less working out for them. So, like, I think those are tensions that are always there, and sometimes in attempts to address poverty, the folks who are coming out of the experience of poverty end up getting labeled with these narratives that are often used to justify poverty, and it's often because of their continued relationships, right? So they can be framed or imagined as irresponsible or as codependent or enmeshed simply because they're in relationship with so many people who continue to have real needs. So I mean, there's a sense in which, like, if you're a poor person in America, there's no amount of money that's ever going to get you out of poverty because you're always going to have, cousins, friends, mamas, other people who are in need, right? So to me, like, we have to work really hard to resist those narratives of kind of blame that get put on people. And that's another reason why I think we have to work to change the basic reality, because as long as we live, in a society that is this radically segregated, it's never going to be possible, right, for a community to live together on equal, like treating one another as equals, and not recognize that we're connected to people who are not able to live as equal.
Right. And that shared humanity of, and changing the narrative, like you said, of what is wrong with this person to what has happened to this person.
Yeah.
That simple shift, that simple turning on of the empathy, I think is pretty crucial to the whole thing.
Yeah.
And with that in mind, what kinds of suggestions would you give to somebody who is really contemplating, hey, I want to be in community with more people, but has no idea how to get started, has no idea what to do, what this means. This may be a foreign concept to some of our listeners, but if you were to encourage someone to take some steps towards expanding their community or trying to live in hospitality, inviting people into their lives, what kinds of things would you say? What kind of practices do you think people should take the first steps with?
Yeah. I mean, I love this question because this is what the early church was about, right? People experienced the power of the Holy Spirit and knew that God was saving them from, a world of destruction from very different backgrounds, right? And so, it's in the text. If you were wealthy and Jesus invited you into the movement, the movement met at your house. Like that's how it got started. And suddenly, folks of means are in relationship with people who probably had only ever worked for them before, but like now they're calling one another brother and sister.
Right.
And I think that's what church is. We have, and again, this is like social conditioning, but we have, all of us, grown up in an increasingly segregated society, and I mean like economically segregated. Racism is very real and is connected to this, but the radical segregation that's just accepted in the society is that, like if you're poor, you'll stay over here, and if you're not, then you'll increasingly, you'll be behind gates and in, increasingly smaller circles of people who are just like you. Like that's just how the society works. I think church interrupts that in a radical way. God says to, people who think we can more or less make it in whatever circle we found ourselves in, actually, no, you can't. Like you're in desperate need of something way beyond you. And here's the good news. I'm inviting you into my family. You can be part of it. But, which is a joy. And, when you need it, you'll always be grateful. But in your gratitude, know that you've got all these sisters and brothers who are part of this family with you. And, you've got responsibility to them too. And you need them. You need them in order to know what it means to be part of this family.
Wow.
I think that's hugely important. One of my great Baptist teachers was a fellow named Clarence Jordan. And Clarence, who started Koinonia Farm down in Georgia, he used to say, the resurrection of Jesus doesn't mean that Jesus has gone on high and you can be with him when you die. He said the resurrection means that Jesus is alive and he's out here in the world and he's coming to your house today and he's bringing all of his homeless sisters and brothers with him. That's the resurrection. The power of God to create a movement of people who can interrupt the radical segregation and divisions of this world. That's beloved community. And I think, like, whether it's Creekside Village or Rutba House or, 1,000 other little ways that we experiment with that, that's just a way of saying, like, that's what church is. That's what every building that puts church on the name ought to be trying to do in some way. It doesn't mean everybody's going to live together in the same house, but we've been caught up in this family. And that means we have obligations to one another.
Right.
And
right.
we've got to figure that out.
Right. Well, I, on a personal note, am very glad that you brought up Clarence Jordan, because he is one of my favorites and worked for Habitat for a number of years. And Millard Fuller was the father of Habitat, but, Clarence was the grandfather.
Clarence dreamed Habitat, and Millard did his darndest to make it real.
To make it happen.
He was trying to operationalize the vision for sure.
Right. Yeah. I've used a different Jordan quote for some other fundraising purposes. It's one of my favorites, but we'll save that one for another time.
Well, I'm deeply grateful for Clarence and for Koinonia Farm, and on what would have been Clarence's 100th birthday, I got to chair the committee that organized a party that was also a kind of celebration of his vision. So it was a real gift. And of course, probably his most famous disciple was Jimmy Carter, who recently crossed on over to the Communion of Saints. And I remember Jimmy Carter saying, he said, in my life, I had a chance to know some incredible people. He said, you know, I learned from Nelson Mandela. I learned from Anwar Sadat. Like, these were incredible people. But he said that no one in my whole life was more influential than the preacher I met here in Sumter County, Clarence Jordan. You know.
Yeah, that's just amazing. So much. Yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with the documentary that Faith Fuller did.
Oh, yeah. Briars in the Cotton Patch. Yeah.
Briars in the Cotton Patch. I have my signed copy at home. For anyone out there listening, if you want a DVD of Briars in the Cotton Patch, I have one you can borrow. I got to find it.
You can probably stream it somewhere now.
You probably could stream it. I think it's on YouTube.
Yeah.
Go check it out on YouTube. It's less than an hour, and it is fantastic. And it tells you some stories that you probably never imagined. But that Koinonia Farms, for those that don't know, was a mixed-race, intentional Christian farming community in rural Georgia, in Americus, Georgia. That is actually the home headquarters of Habitat for Humanity. But they were right up in the middle of the civil rights movement and some of the violence. People would drive by and shoot at them and burn crosses near them and things like that. So phenomenal documentary if you have the chance to check it out. It's pretty great.
Well, and in so many ways, it's an example of what we're talking about, right?
Yep.
I mean, Koinonia has never been big. It's always been a few families living together on a farm. But it was committed to a big vision.
Right.
Right. And all that Habitat has done all over the world was rooted in that basic vision they were trying to live out, which was just this notion that, like, all God's children deserve what we all need.
Right. A simple, decent place to live.
Yeah.
That's what their mantra is. Yeah. And, I'm really excited for what we are hoping to do with Creekside and hoping that is what Creekside becomes, is offering our friends and neighbors a decent place to live, a decent place to call home and be stable and find that community that we so desperately need. We are a communal species, right? I mean, we depend on it.
Yeah.
No one makes it alone.
That's right.
And,
and maybe the most hopeful thing is that we all continue to feel the need. I mean, folks who don't have a home certainly feel the need for community, but man, I talk to a lot of lonely people living in big houses. Lots of resources, but they still know they need community.
Right.
And so, I mean, I pray that Creekside can be a place for a lot of people to find beloved community. The people who live there and maybe, hundreds of people in Waco who can make it a regular part of their life to visit and maybe share meals there, be part of what's happening. I mean, I know it takes a lot of people to even get something like that off the ground, but giving or supporting it as it's starting, it might just be like a way to sort of, buy in. I mean, people with money buy into all kinds of stuff. People buy into these clubs and gyms and all these things, I think, because we know we need community, and this feels like something that's worth investing in.
Well, I certainly think so. Otherwise, I wouldn't have joined to help get this started. Yeah. But we're thrilled to have you here to learn from you, and we're really excited for what's to come with Creekside. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
And if there's anything else you'd like to add, please do. But man, what an honor it's been to sit and visit with you. I've had the chance to break bread with you a few times, but this was a first time we've just had the chance to sit and talk at length. So it's been my pleasure.
For it. If the microphones help make it happen, thankful for the microphone.
Thankful for this technology that we have to do this.
Yeah. And for those of you who've joined us, I mean, podcasts are an interesting way to knit together, people who are scattered in many ways, but, everybody can put it in, put the earbuds in or get in the car and
That's right.
and listen and join a conversation. So thank you for being with us.
Yeah,
Those
and
who
I'd
joined
love
us.
to hear from anybody who's listened to this from outside of the Waco network. I would love to hear if somebody from across the world has listened to this. So please reach out to us. You can find us at missionwaco.org. Send us a note. We'd be happy to hear from you.
And you should, because this Mission Waco is right here in Waco, but y'all have connected with people all around the world.
We have, yeah.
They
Mission
might know
Worlds.
somebody you know.
That is absolutely true. So our reach has been far and wide throughout the world, and it's an organization that's been around 30 something years now, and the reach that we have had is pretty significant, and we are still here doing the work that needs to be done. We're doing the work, being the hands and feet of Jesus right here in this community.
Yeah.
So anyway, Jonathan, such a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Blessings.
You can follow us on Creekside Community Village social handles and where you listen to your own podcasts.
This has been a Rogue Media Network production.